Maria Santos looked at the golden ticket in her hands for the 10th time that day. She could hardly believe it was real. The radio station had called her name as the winner of their contest. The prize was a ticket to see the famous pianist Heinrich Zimmermann at the Grand Concert Hall in Vienna. She had never been to such a fancy place in her whole life. She stood outside the Musikverein concert hall and stared up at its beautiful golden walls. People in expensive clothes walked past her into the building. The women wore sparkling jewelry and long dresses that probably cost more than Maria made in a year. The men had perfect suits and shiny shoes. Maria looked down at her own black dress. She had bought it at a second-hand store 3 years ago for her sister's wedding. It was the nicest thing she owned. Maria worked as a housekeeper at a small hotel downtown. Every morning at 6 she would put on her uniform and clean rooms until evening. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors and making beds. Her back ached from bending over bathtubs and carrying heavy laundry. But she never complained. The work paid for her small apartment and kept food on her table. Tonight was different. Tonight she would sit in a real concert hall and listen to classical music played by one of the world's best pianists. She had saved enough money to take a taxi instead of the bus. She wanted to arrive looking as nice as possible. The security guard at the entrance looked at Maria's ticket and pointed toward the main doors. Inside, the concert hall took her breath away. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen stars. The walls were covered in gold paint that seemed to glow. Red velvet seats filled the room in perfect rows. Maria had only seen places like this in movies. A woman in a black uniform showed Maria to her seat. It was in the back section, far from the stage. Maria did not mind. She was just happy to be there. Around her, people talked in quiet voices about music and art. They used words Maria did not understand, but their voices sounded educated and refined. Maria sat quietly and watched the other people arrive. She noticed how they greeted each other with air kisses and perfect smiles. The women's perfume filled the air with expensive scents. The men talked about business deals and vacation homes in different countries. Maria felt like she was watching a different world through glass. A lady sitting near Maria wore a diamond necklace that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was styled perfectly and her makeup looked like it was done by a professional. She talked to her friend about her son who was studying music in Paris. Maria listened and tried to imagine having enough money to send a child to study in another country. The lights began to dim, and people found their seats. Maria felt excited and nervous at the same time. She had always loved music, even though she rarely had chances to hear it performed live. Sometimes she would listen to classical music on her old radio while she worked. The beautiful sounds helped make her long days feel shorter. Heinrich Zimmermann walked onto the stage and the crowd clapped loudly. He was a tall man with gray hair and perfect posture. He wore a black suit that looked like it was made just for him. He smiled at the audience, but his smile seemed cold and distant. Maria could see why people called him one of the greatest pianists alive, but there was something about his expression that made her feel uncomfortable. The pianist sat at the grand piano in the center of the stage. The instrument was huge and black, polished until it shined like a mirror. When Zimmermann placed his hands on the keys, the entire hall became silent. Even the sound of people breathing seemed to stop. Then the music began. The first notes filled the concert hall like magic. Maria had never heard anything so beautiful in her life. The piano seemed to sing and cry and laugh all at the same time. Zimmermann's fingers moved so fast they looked like they were dancing across the keys. Every note was perfect, clear and powerful. Maria closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She forgot about her tired feet and her old dress. She forgot about cleaning hotel rooms and scrubbing bathrooms. For those moments, she was somewhere else entirely. The music told stories without words. It painted pictures in her mind of mountains and oceans and starlit skies. The piece was Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1. Maria recognized it because she had heard it many times on her radio. But hearing it live was completely different. The sound surrounded her from all directions. She could feel the vibrations in her chest and in her bones. Tears came to her eyes, but they were happy tears. During the quieter parts of the music, Maria could hear the pianist breathing. She could hear the small sounds the piano made as his fingers touched the keys. These tiny details made the performance feel real and alive in a way that recordings never could. The other people in the audience sat perfectly still, like statues. They knew how to behave at such events. Maria tried to copy them, sitting straight and keeping her hands folded in her lap. She did not want to do anything that would make her stand out or embarrass herself. When the first piece ended, everyone clapped politely. Maria clapped too, but she wanted to cheer and shout about how wonderful it was. The music had touched something deep inside her heart. Something she had forgotten was there. Zimmerman played 3 more pieces. Each one was different but equally beautiful. Maria watched his face as he played and noticed that he seemed to be somewhere else, lost in the music. For a moment his cold expression softened, and she could see the artist behind the arrogant man. During the final piece, Maria found herself remembering things from long ago. Memories she had pushed away because they were too painful to think about. But tonight, with this beautiful music filling her ears, those memories did not hurt as much. They felt like old friends coming to visit. When the concert ended, the audience gave Zimmerman a standing ovation. People shouted "Bravo!" and threw flowers onto the stage. The pianist bowed deeply, his cold smile returning. He looked out at the audience like a king looking at his subjects. Maria clapped until her hands hurt. She wished the evening could last forever. Soon she would have to return to her small apartment and wake up early for work tomorrow. But right now, she felt like she was living in a beautiful dream. As people began to leave their seats, Maria stayed sitting for a few extra moments. She wanted to remember every detail of this magical evening. The golden walls, the crystal lights, and most of all, the incredible music that had made her feel so alive. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, her life would change in a way she could never have imagined. After the concert ended, the audience moved to a large room next to the concert hall for a reception. Waiters in white uniforms carried trays of champagne and fancy food that Maria had never seen before. The room was filled with the same golden decorations as the concert hall, and soft music played in the background. Maria was not sure if she was supposed to go to the reception. Her ticket had not mentioned anything about it, but she saw other people from the concert walking that way, so she followed them. She thought maybe she could stay for just a few minutes and see what a real high society party looked like. The reception room was crowded with people talking in small groups. They all seemed to know each other well. Maria stood near the wall, trying to stay out of the way. She watched the elegant ladies sip their champagne and laugh at jokes she could not hear. The men talked loudly about their businesses and their expensive cars. Heinrich Zimmermann stood in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. People waited in line to shake his hand and tell him how wonderful his performance was. He accepted their praise with a cold smile, nodding his head like he expected nothing less. Maria could see that he enjoyed being the center of attention. A waiter offered Maria a glass of champagne, but she politely said no. She had never drunk champagne before and was afraid she might spill it on her dress. Instead, she just watched and listened to the conversations around her. The people talked about art galleries and opera seasons and vacation homes in Switzerland. Their world was so different from hers. Maria noticed a woman showing off a new diamond ring to her friends. The ring was so big it caught the light from across the room. Another man bragged about buying a painting that cost more money than Maria would make in 10 years. She felt like she was watching actors in a play about rich people. Near the piano in the corner of the room, a small group of young people were talking about music schools and competitions. One girl mentioned that she had just started taking lessons with a famous teacher in London. A boy talked about performing at Carnegie Hall next month. Maria listened to their confident voices and remembered what it felt like to have such dreams. As the evening went on, more people gathered around Zimmerman. A wealthy businessman thanked him for playing at his daughter's wedding last year. A lady in fur coat asked if he would consider giving private lessons to her son. Everyone wanted to be close to the famous pianist. Zimmerman seemed to enjoy the attention, but Maria could see that his eyes were constantly looking around the room. He appeared to be studying the people, judging them, deciding who was important enough for his time. His gaze moved from one expensive outfit to another, from one diamond necklace to the next. Then his eyes found Maria standing by the wall in her simple black dress. She felt his stare and looked down at her hands. Her fingers were rough and red from years of cleaning work. There were small scars from cuts and burns she had gotten while working in hotel kitchens. She tried to hide her hands behind her back, but it was too late. Zimmerman had noticed her. He whispered something to the man standing next to him, and they both looked in Maria's direction. Then Zimmerman smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just thought of something amusing. He began walking toward Maria, and the crowd followed him like he was a magnet. Maria felt her heart beating faster. She wanted to leave, but there were too many people between her and the door. She was trapped against the wall with nowhere to go. "Ladies and gentlemen," Zimmerman said in a loud voice that made everyone stop talking, "I have an idea for some entertainment." The crowd turned to look at him with interest. They were always eager to see what the famous pianist would do next. Zimmerman stopped directly in front of Maria. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought. His expensive suit probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His shoes were so shiny she could see her reflection in them. Everything about him screamed wealth and privilege. "I could not help but notice this lovely lady," he said, gesturing toward Maria. "She has been watching our little gathering with such interest." His voice was smooth and cultured, but Maria could hear something cruel underneath the polite words. The crowd pressed closer, curious to see what was happening. Maria felt dozens of eyes staring at her. Her face grew hot with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear into the wall behind her. "I was thinking," Zimmerman continued, "that perhaps our guest would like to entertain us with a little music." He gestured toward the piano in the corner. After all, music should be shared by everyone, should it not? Some people in the crowd began to smile. They thought this was a wonderful idea. A few laughed quietly behind their hands. Maria realized that they were expecting her to make a fool of herself. This was their entertainment for the evening. "Oh, what a delightful suggestion," said a woman with too much makeup. "Yes, please do play something for us." Others began to agree, clapping their hands and encouraging Maria to go to the piano. Maria looked around the room desperately. Every face was turned toward her, waiting to see what she would do. Some people looked genuinely curious. Others seemed to be enjoying what they thought would be an amusing disaster. A few had already pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. I do not really play," Maria said quietly, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "Nonsense," Zimmerman said loudly. "Everyone can play a little something. Perhaps Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" This comment caused several people to laugh out loud. Maria felt her cheeks burning with shame. "Come now, do not be shy," pressed another man. "It will be fun." He spoke to her like she was a child who needed encouragement to perform a trick. Maria looked at Zimmerman's face and saw the cruel pleasure in his eyes. He was enjoying her discomfort. This was his idea of entertainment, watching a poor woman embarrass herself in front of his wealthy friends. She was just a joke to him, a way to amuse his audience. The pianist gestured grandly toward the piano. "Please, I insist," he said with fake politeness. "After hearing such beautiful music tonight, surely you must be inspired to try." The crowd began to chant softly, "Play, play, play." They thought this was all great fun. Maria realized that there was no way out. If she refused, they would think she was rude. If she tried to leave, they would probably stop her. She was trapped in their cruel game. Maria's hands were shaking now. She thought about all the times in her life when people had looked down on her because she was poor. All the times she had been treated like she did not matter because she cleaned toilets for a living. All the times she had been made to feel small and worthless. But something else was happening inside her too. Deep down, in a place she had locked away long ago, something was stirring. A memory of different times when music had been her whole world. When she had dreamed of standing on stages and sharing beautiful sounds with people who would listen with respect and wonder. "Very well," Maria said, her voice stronger now. The crowd quieted, surprised by the change in her tone. "I will play something for you." Zimmerman's smile grew wider. He was clearly delighted that his cruel joke was working so perfectly. He stepped aside with an exaggerated bow, making room for Maria to walk toward the piano. Maria moved through the crowd, feeling every eye on her. People whispered to each other as she passed. Some were giggling. Others looked uncomfortable, realizing that what was happening was not very kind. As she approached the piano, Maria felt something changing inside her. The scared, embarrassed woman was fading away. In her place, someone else was emerging. Someone who had been sleeping for 30 years but was finally waking up. She reached the piano and looked down at the black and white keys. They seemed to shimmer in the light from the crystal chandelier above. For a moment, Maria forgot about the crowd behind her. She forgot about Zimmerman's cruel smile and the phones recording her every move. All she could think about was the music. Maria stood in front of the grand piano and felt the weight of 100 eyes watching her. The room had grown quiet except for the soft whispers and nervous giggles from the crowd behind her. She could hear the click of phone cameras as people, prepared to record what they expected would be an embarrassing moment. The piano was magnificent. Its black surface was so polished that Maria could see her reflection in it. The keys looked perfect, each one positioned exactly where it should be. This was not like the old, broken piano she remembered from long ago. This was an instrument worthy of the greatest musicians in the world. Behind her, she heard Zimmerman whisper to someone, "This should be amusing." His voice carried just enough for her to hear. He was not even trying to hide his cruel intentions anymore. To him, she was nothing more than entertainment for his wealthy friends. Maria's hands trembled as she approached the piano bench. The leather seat was soft and comfortable, designed for professional musicians who spent hours practicing their craft. She sat down slowly, trying to maintain her dignity even though she felt like everyone was laughing at her inside their heads. The crowd pressed closer, forming a semicircle around the piano. Some people held champagne glasses, others had their phones ready. A few looked uncomfortable about what was happening, but they did not speak up to stop it. They were all part of Zimmerman's world, and they would not challenge him. "Take your time," said a woman with a fake sweet voice. "We are all very excited to hear what you will play." Her tone was the kind people used when talking to small children or people they thought were simple. Maria placed her hands on her lap and looked down at them. These hands had scrubbed thousands of floors and cleaned countless bathrooms. They had made beds and washed dishes and carried heavy loads of laundry. They were not the hands of a pianist anymore. They were the hands of a working woman who had forgotten her dreams long ago. But as she sat there, something strange began to happen. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away. The whispers and giggles became distant, like sounds from another room. Even the bright lights seemed to grow softer. Maria felt like she was sinking into a quiet, peaceful place inside herself. Slowly, she raised her hands and placed them on the piano keys. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingers. For a moment, she just sat there feeling the familiar shape of the keyboard. It had been so many years, but her hands seemed to remember exactly where they belonged. The crowd grew more excited as they saw her hands on the keys. Someone whispered, "Here it comes." Another person giggled quietly. They were all waiting for the disaster they expected to unfold. But Maria was not thinking about them anymore. In her mind, she was somewhere else entirely. She was remembering a time when music had been her whole world, when she had spent hours every day practicing scales and learning difficult pieces, when teachers had told her she had a gift that could take her anywhere she wanted to go. She thought about her first piano teacher, Mrs. Weber, who had seen something special in the young girl from a poor family. Mrs. Weber had given her free lessons because she believed Maria had talent worth nurturing. She had been kind and patient, teaching Maria not just how to play notes, but how to feel the music in her heart. Maria remembered the old piano in the community center where she had practiced as a child. It was nothing like this beautiful instrument, but it had been her gateway to a magical world. On that broken-down piano with its chipped keys and worn pedals, she had learned to make music that could move people to tears. She thought about the competitions she had won as a teenager, the audiences that had given her standing ovations, the music teachers who had fought to get her scholarships to the best schools. She had been somebody then. She had been a musician with a future full of possibilities. But then life had happened. Her mother had gotten sick, and there was no money for doctors or medicine. Her father had left, unable to handle the responsibility. Maria, the eldest child, had been forced to quit school and find work to support her family. The piano had become just a memory, a beautiful dream from another lifetime. Now, 30 years later, she was sitting at another piano. The circumstances were different, but the instrument was the same. The keys were still black and white. The music was still there, waiting to be released. Maria took a deep breath and made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of playing something simple and safe, instead of giving the crowd the embarrassing performance they expected, She was going to play something real, something that came from the deepest part of her soul. She closed her eyes and let her fingers find their way to the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most difficult pieces in all of classical music. Most professional pianists spent years learning to play it properly. It required not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding and perfect timing. The first notes rang out across the reception room like a bell. They were clear and strong, and absolutely perfect. The giggling stopped immediately. The whispers died away. Even the sound of breathing seemed to pause. Maria's fingers began to move across the keys with a grace and confidence that shocked everyone watching. This was not the fumbling of an amateur. This was not the hesitant playing of someone who barely knew how to find middle C. This was the playing of someone who had been born to make music. The melody began to build, each note flowing into the next like water running downhill. Maria's hands moved independently, the left hand providing a rich, complex foundation, while the right hand sang out the beautiful main theme. Her fingers seemed to dance across the keys, finding exactly the right touch for each note. Behind her, the crowd stood frozen in disbelief. Phones that had been raised to record a disaster now captured something entirely different. Champagne. Glasses remained untouched as people forgot they were holding them. The cruel smiles disappeared from faces as the reality of what they were hearing began to sink in. Zimmerman's expression changed from amused confidence to confusion to something approaching shock. His mouth opened slightly as he listened to music being played at a level he had not expected. This was not the embarrassing moment he had planned. This was something else entirely. The music continued to flow from Maria's fingers like it had been waiting inside the piano all along. Every phrase was perfectly shaped, every dynamic change executed with professional precision. She played with the kind of emotional depth that comes only from years of serious study and natural talent. As the piece progressed, Maria seemed to transform before their eyes. The tired housekeeper in the simple black dress was fading away. In her place sat a musician, a real artist who understood music at the deepest level. Her posture straightened, her movements became more fluid, and her face took on an expression of intense concentration and joy. The room was completely silent, now except for the incredible music pouring from the piano. People who had come expecting to be entertained by someone else's humiliation found themselves listening to one of the most beautiful performances they had ever heard. Some began to realize that they were witnessing something very special, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. As Maria continued playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the impossible was happening before everyone's eyes. The difficult passages that would challenge even professional pianists flowed from her fingers like she had been practicing them every day for years. Her technique was flawless, but more than that, her interpretation was deeply musical and emotionally powerful. The crowd stood in complete silence, afraid that even breathing too loudly might break the spell they were witnessing. Some people had tears forming in their eyes without understanding why. The music was reaching places in their hearts that they had forgotten existed. This was not just skilled playing, this was art at its highest level. Heinrich Zimmermann felt his world shifting beneath his feet. He had spent his entire career building a reputation as one of the world's greatest pianists. He knew talent when he heard it, and what he was hearing now was extraordinary. This woman, whom he had chosen as the target of his cruel joke, was playing with a level of artistry that rivaled his own. His face had gone pale, and his hands were shaking slightly. The confident smirk that had been his trademark expression was completely gone. Instead, he looked like a man who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake. The joke was on him now, and everyone in the room was beginning to understand that. Maria's playing continued to build in intensity and beauty. She tackled the most challenging sections of the concerto with ease, her fingers flying across the keys in passages that most people could not even imagine playing. Her left hand provided rich, complex harmonies, while her right hand sang out melodies that seemed to tell stories of love, loss, hope, and triumph. A woman near the front of the crowd whispered to her husband, "This is impossible. How can she be playing like this?" Her husband could only shake his head in amazement. He had been a music lover his entire life, and he knew he was hearing something special. Behind them, A young man who was studying music at the university pulled out his phone, but not to record something embarrassing. He was recording what he knew was one of the most beautiful performances he would ever witness. He would watch this video many times in the years to come, trying to understand how someone could play with such incredible skill and emotion. Maria seemed completely lost in the music now. Her eyes were closed and her body moved with the rhythm of the piece. She was no longer aware of the crowd watching her. She was not thinking about her job at the hotel or her simple apartment or her rough hands. She was only thinking about the music, and the music was thinking about her. The piece required not just technical ability, but also deep understanding of its emotional content. Rachmaninoff had written it during a time of great personal struggle, and Maria seemed to understand every feeling the composer had put into the notes. Her playing conveyed sadness and joy, struggle and victory, all woven together in a tapestry of sound that left the listeners breathless. An elderly man in the crowd began to cry openly. He had been a pianist himself in his younger days, though never at this level. He knew how difficult this piece was, and he could appreciate not just the technical mastery, but also the musical intelligence that Maria was displaying. He felt like he was witnessing a miracle. Zimmerman found himself studying Maria's technique with the eye of a professional. Her hand position was perfect. Her pedaling was sophisticated and musical. Her phrasing showed an understanding of the composer's intentions that came only from years of serious study. This was not someone who had just learned to play a few notes. This was a trained musician of the highest caliber. But how was this possible? She was a hotel maid. She had rough hands and a simple dress. She had been standing alone at the reception like she did not belong there. Nothing about her suggested that she had any musical training at all. Yet here she was, playing one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire like she was born to do it. The music reached a particularly beautiful passage, where the melody soared above gentle, rolling accompaniment. Maria's touch was so sensitive that each note seemed to glow with its own light. She played with the kind of musical maturity that usually came only after decades of professional experience. A music critic who happened to be at the reception began to feel very uncomfortable. He had reviewed Zimmerman's concert earlier that evening and had praised it highly. But what he was hearing now was at least as good as Zimmerman's performance, and in some ways it was more moving. This unknown woman was playing with a depth of feeling that touched his soul. Some people in the crowd began to look at each other with confusion and growing shame. They had come here expecting to laugh at someone's failure. Instead, they were witnessing one of the most beautiful things they had ever seen. The cruel joke they had enjoyed was turning into something that made them question their own character. A young woman who had been giggling earlier now felt sick to her stomach. She realized that she had been ready to mock someone who was obviously far more talented than she could ever hope to be. The woman playing the piano had more musical ability in her little finger than most people had in their entire bodies. Maria's playing continued to unfold like a flower blooming in fast motion. Each phrase revealed new layers of beauty and meaning. The technical challenges that would stop most pianists in their tracks seemed effortless under her fingers. She played with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering her craft. The melody line sang out clear and pure above the complex harmonic support. Maria shaped each phrase with perfect timing, building to climaxes and settling into quiet moments with the skill of a master storyteller. The music seemed to be coming not just from the piano but from somewhere deep inside her soul. Zimmerman felt the emotion he rarely experienced: humility. He was watching someone play with a level of artistry that reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Before fame and wealth had made him cold and arrogant, he had once played with this kind of pure musical passion. This woman was showing him what he had lost along the way. The crowd was completely transfixed now. People who had been chatting about their expensive possessions and social status were now focused entirely on the music flowing from the piano. The beautiful sounds were stripping away all the pretense and showing them what really mattered in life. As Maria approached the end of the first movement, her playing became even more intense and emotional. The music built to a powerful climax that seemed to shake the very walls of the reception room. Then suddenly, it settled into a quiet, peaceful conclusion that left everyone holding their breath. When the last note faded away, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of wonder, shock, and the beginning of understanding. Everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. something that would change how they thought about music, about talent, and about the assumptions they made about other people. Maria opened her eyes and looked down at her hands on the keys. For a moment, she seemed surprised to find herself sitting at the piano. The spell was broken, and she was back in the reception room surrounded by all these wealthy strangers. But something fundamental had changed, both in her and in everyone who had been listening. Maria did not stop after the first movement. Without pause, she moved into the second movement of Rachmaninoff's concerto, the Adagio sostenuto. If the first movement had shocked the audience, what came next would touch their souls in ways they never expected. The second movement began with soft, gentle notes that seemed to float in the air like whispered secrets. Maria's touch on the keys was so delicate that each note seemed to shimmer with emotion. This was music that spoke of longing, of memories, of love that was both beautiful and painful. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were caressing something precious and fragile. The audience found themselves leaning forward, drawn into the intimate world that Maria was creating with her music. The reception room, with all its golden decorations and crystal lights, seemed to fade away. In its place was something much more real and human, the sound of one person's heart speaking to others through the language of music. An older woman in the crowd felt tears rolling down her cheeks. The music was reminding her of her late husband, how they used to dance together in their small apartment when they were young and poor but deeply in love. She had not thought about those days in years, but Maria's playing was bringing back memories so vivid she could almost smell her husband's cologne. Heinrich Zimmermann watched Maria's hands with the eye of a master musician. Her technique was absolutely perfect, but that was not what amazed him most. It was her musical understanding that left him speechless. She knew exactly how to shape each phrase, when to push forward and when to hold back, how to make the melody sing while keeping the accompaniment perfectly balanced. This was not just someone who had learned to play the notes correctly. This was someone who understood music from the inside out. She played like someone who had lived with this piece for years, who knew its every secret and could reveal them all with perfect timing and exquisite taste. A young musician in the crowd recognized the technical challenges of what Maria was playing. The second movement looked simple on the page, but it required incredible control and musical maturity to play well. The melody had to float above the accompaniment like a bird flying over water. The dynamics had to be perfect, with each note precisely judged for volume and color. Maria made it all look effortless. Her left hand provided a steady, warm foundation, while her right hand sang out the melody with heartbreaking beauty. She used the piano's full range of colors, from the darkest bass notes to the brightest treble, painting pictures with sound that reached directly into the listener's emotions. The music told a story without words. It spoke of someone looking back on their life, remembering moments of joy and sorrow, love and loss. Maria's playing conveyed all of these emotions with such clarity that people in the audience felt like they were reading her autobiography. Written in musical notes, a businessman who had spent the entire evening talking about profit margins and stock prices found himself thinking about his daughter, who lived far away and rarely called. The music was making him remember what really mattered in life. He made a mental note to call her tomorrow and tell her he loved her. Zimmermann felt something breaking apart inside his chest. For years he had played the same piece, but he had focused on showing off his technical skills, rather than revealing its emotional content. Listening to Maria play, he realized that he had been missing the whole point of music. She was showing him what it meant to truly communicate through art. The melody reached its highest point, and Maria's playing became even more expressive. She used subtle changes in timing and touch to make each note mean something different. A note played slightly louder suggested hope. A note held a little longer expressed longing. A gentle ritardando conveyed acceptance and peace. The crowd was completely silent now, afraid to even breathe loudly. Some people had closed their eyes to better focus on the music. Others stared at Maria in wonder, trying to understand how someone they had dismissed as unimportant could create something so beautiful. A teenager who had been bored at the reception suddenly understood why her grandmother had always told her that music was the most important thing in life. She had never really listened to classical music before, but Maria's playing was opening up a whole new world for her. She decided that she would start taking piano lessons again, lessons she had quit because she thought they were boring. As the second movement continued, Maria seemed to grow more confident and expressive. The shy, embarrassed woman who had stood against the wall was completely gone now. In her place sat an artist who knew exactly what she was doing and why she was doing it. Her whole body moved with the music, her shoulders and arms flowing with the phrases like a dancer. The music reached a particularly tender passage where the melody seemed to whisper secrets of the heart. Maria played these notes with such sensitivity that they seemed to glow with inner light. Her understanding of the composer's intentions was so complete that it felt like Rachmaninoff himself was in the room, approving of her interpretation. Zimmerman realized that he was witnessing something that happened perhaps once in a generation. This was not just good playing or even great playing. This was transcendent playing, the kind that reminded people why music existed in the first place. This woman was channeling something divine through her fingers. A music teacher in the audience began to weep as she thought about all the students she had taught over the years. She had always told them that technique was important, but that music came from the heart. Most of them had never really understood what she meant. Now she was hearing a perfect example of what happened when someone combined perfect technique with a soul full of music. The second movement built to a gentle climax and then settled into a peaceful conclusion. As the last notes faded away, the silence that followed felt sacred. No one wanted to break it. They all sensed that they had just experienced something holy, something that connected them all to the deepest parts of their humanity. But Maria was not finished. Without hesitation, she launched into the third movement, the Allegro scherzando. If the first two movements had been about emotion and beauty, the third was about joy, energy, and triumphant celebration. Her fingers flew across the keys and passages that would challenge even the most skilled professionals. The music danced and sparkled, full of life and movement. Maria's playing was so energetic and joyful that people in the audience found themselves smiling despite their amazement. She played with the kind of enthusiasm that was contagious, making everyone in the room feel more alive. This movement required incredible finger independence and rhythmic precision. The left and right hands had to work together like perfectly coordinated dancers, each playing complex patterns that interwove to create the overall musical fabric. Maria handled all of these challenges with ease, her years of training evident in every perfectly executed passage. As she played, Maria felt more alive than she had in 30 years. The music was pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. All the emotions she had kept locked away, all the dreams she had abandoned, all the musical passion she had buried under years of hard work and responsibility. It was all coming, back in a flood of sound and feeling. The audience watched in amazement as this remarkable performance continued to unfold before their eyes. They were witnessing not just great music making, but the rebirth of an artist who had been sleeping for 3 decades. As Maria played the final passages of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the music built to a magnificent climax that seemed to lift everyone in the room towards something greater than themselves. Her fingers moved with lightning speed across the keys, playing runs and chords that would challenge even the most accomplished pianists in the world. Yet every note was crystal clear, every phrase perfectly shaped. The final movement was like a celebration of life itself. The music danced and soared, full of energy and joy that seemed to bounce off the golden walls of the reception room. Maria played with such passion and skill that people forgot they were listening to a single piano. The sound filled the space like a full orchestra, rich and powerful and gloriously alive. Heinrich Zimmermann stood frozen in place, his face pale with shock and something that looked like fear. As a professional musician, he could recognize greatness when he heard it. What Maria was playing was not just technically perfect, it was artistically sublime. She was not just hitting the right notes at the right time, she was revealing the soul of the music in a way that few pianists ever achieved. The cruel joke he had planned was turning into the most humbling experience of his life. This woman, whom he had chosen to embarrass because of her simple clothes and rough hands, was playing with a level of artistry that made his own performance earlier that evening seem cold and mechanical by comparison. As the music raced toward its conclusion, Maria's whole body moved with the rhythm and energy of the piece. Her face was glowing with joy and concentration. For these precious minutes, she was not a hotel housekeeper struggling to pay her bills. She was not someone who cleaned bathrooms and made beds for wealthy tourists. She was a musician, pure and simple, sharing her gift with the world. The audience watched in amazement as Maria navigated the most challenging passages with ease. Her hands seemed to know exactly where every note was located. Her timing was perfect, her dynamics expressive, her phrasing musical and intelligent. This was the playing of someone who had spent years mastering not just technique, but the art of musical communication. A famous music critic who had been at the reception began to understand that he was witnessing musical history in the making. This was the kind of performance that people would talk about for decades. He started making mental notes for the article he would write, though he knew that words could never capture the magic of what he was hearing. The final chords of the concerto rang out with triumphant power. Maria's hands came down on the keys with perfect timing and exactly the right amount of force. The sound filled the room like thunder, then gradually faded into silence. For several long moments, no one moved. No one breathed. The silence was so complete it seemed to have weight and substance. Then, as if a spell had been broken, one person began to clap. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in the most thunderous applause any of them had ever heard. People leaped to their feet as if pulled by invisible strings. The ovation was not polite or restrained. It was explosive, emotional, and completely heartfelt. Maria sat at the piano bench, looking surprised and a little overwhelmed by the reaction. She had been so lost in the music that she had almost forgotten about the audience. Now seeing all these people on their feet, clapping and cheering, she felt a mixture of joy and disbelief. Was this really happening? Many people in the crowd were crying openly now. They were not crying from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they had just experienced. The music had touched places in their hearts that they had forgotten existed. They felt like they had been given a precious gift, something they would treasure for the rest of their lives. "Bravo!" shouted someone from the back of the room. "Magnificent!" called out another voice. The applause continued to thunder through the reception hall, showing no signs of stopping. People clapped until their hands hurt, and then they clapped some more. Zimmerman stood in the middle of the crowd, his own hands moving automatically to join the applause. But his clapping was slow and mechanical, like someone in shock. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. How had he been so wrong about this woman? How had he made such a terrible mistake? A wealthy businessman who had been bragging about his expensive art collection earlier in the evening now realized that he had just witnessed something far more valuable than any painting he owned. The music Maria had shared was priceless in a way that his material possessions could never be. The ovation went on and on. Some people called out, "Encore!" Others simply stood and clapped, their faces shining with joy and amazement. A young woman who had been using her phone to record what she thought would be an embarrassing moment now had video of one of the most beautiful performances she had ever seen. Maria finally stood up from the piano bench, her legs a little shaky from the emotional intensity of the performance. She looked out at the crowd of people who were celebrating her music, and for a moment she felt like she was in a dream. These were the same people who had been ready to laugh at her just a few minutes ago. Now they were treating her like a conquering hero. But instead of basking in the applause, Maria did something that surprised everyone. She simply nodded graciously, gave a small, dignified bow, and began to walk away from the piano. She moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, not seeking more attention or trying to extend the moment. This humble response only made the audience respect her more. Here was someone who had just given them an extraordinary gift, and she was not demanding anything in return. She was not posing for pictures or asking for business cards or trying to turn her moment of triumph into personal gain. An elderly gentleman who had been a musician in his youth felt compelled to reach out and touch Maria's arm as she passed. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music." Other people began to approach Maria as she made her way through the crowd. They wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how much her playing had meant to them, to somehow express their gratitude for what she had shared. But they also seemed to sense that she needed space, that she was still processing what had just happened. A music teacher from the local conservatory pushed through the crowd, desperate to speak with Maria. She had questions about where Maria had studied, who her teachers had been, why she was not performing professionally. But as she reached the spot where Maria had been standing, she found that the mysterious pianist had already reached the edge of the crowd. The applause was finally beginning to die down, but people continued to talk excitedly about what they had just witnessed. They compared it to other great performances they had seen. though most agreed that this had been something special, something they would never forget. Zimmerman remained standing near the piano, looking lost and confused. The confident, arrogant man who had started this evening as the center of attention now seemed small and uncertain. He stared at the piano keys where Maria's hands had just created such magic, trying to understand how his cruel joke had turned into such a profound lesson about talent, dignity, and the power of music. As Maria reached the edge of the crowd, she turned back for one last look at the piano that had given her such joy. The instrument sat silent now, waiting for the next musician to bring it to life. But for these few precious minutes it had been hers, and she had used it to remember who she really was beneath all the years of struggle and hardship. The ovation had ended, but the real drama was just beginning. People in the crowd were starting to whisper among themselves, asking questions about who this mysterious woman was and where she had learned to play like that. Some were beginning to remember things, to piece together clues that would soon reveal the truth about Maria Santos and the remarkable story of her past. As Maria made her way toward the exit, a distinguished older man in the crowd suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence. His eyes widened with recognition and his face went completely white. Dr. Friedrich Weber, one of Vienna's most respected music critics and historians, had just realized something that would change everything. "My God," he whispered to his wife. "That's Maria Santos." His wife looked confused. "Who is Maria Santos?" she asked. But Dr. Weber was already pushing through the crowd, his heart racing with excitement and disbelief. He had not seen Maria in 30 years, but he would never forget her face or the way she moved when she played piano. She had been one of the most promising young musicians of her generation, a child prodigy who had seemed destined for greatness. "Maria Santos," he called out, his voice carrying across the reception room. "Maria Santos from the Vienna Conservatory." The name hit the crowd like a bolt of lightning. Conversation stopped mid-word. People turned to stare at Maria, who had frozen near the exit door. Some of the older music lovers in the crowd began to remember that name, began to recall stories they had heard decades ago about a young pianist who had disappeared from the music world just when her career was about to take off. Dr. Weber reached Maria and stood before her with tears in his eyes. "It is you, is it not? Maria Santos, who played with the Vienna Philharmonic when she was only 19, who won the International Young Artist Competition in 1994. Maria's face had gone pale. She looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. For 30 years she had lived a quiet, invisible life. Now suddenly her past was being revealed to a room full of strangers who had just heard her play again for the first time in decades. Yes, she said quietly, "but that was a long time ago." "Long time ago," Dr. Weber exclaimed. "You were the most promising pianist of your generation. You studied with Professor Muller at the conservatory. You performed Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 with the Philharmonic when you were still a teenager. Critics said you were destined to be one of the great pianists of our time." The crowd pressed closer, hungry for details about this incredible revelation. A young journalist pulled out her phone and began searching the internet for information about Maria Santos. Others whispered excitedly to each other, trying to remember what they had heard about the young prodigy who had vanished from the classical music world. An older woman in an expensive evening gown gasped as the memories came flooding back. "Yes, I remember now. There were articles about her in all the music magazines. She was supposed to make her debut at Carnegie Hall, but she never showed up. No one knew what happened to her." Heinrich Zimmerman, who had been standing in stunned silence since Maria's performance ended, now looked like he had been struck by lightning. The woman he had chosen to humiliate as a joke had been one of the most celebrated young musicians in Europe. The cruel entertainment he had planned had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Dr. Weber continued talking, his voice growing more excited with each word. "You were accepted to study at Juilliard in New York. You had offers to perform with orchestras around the world. Your recording of Bach's Goldberg Variations was supposed to be released by Deutsche Grammophon. What happened? Why did you disappear?" Maria looked around at all the faces staring at her with curiosity and amazement. She felt exposed and vulnerable, like someone had just removed a protective shell she had been wearing for 30 years. These people wanted to know her story, but it was a story full of pain and sacrifice that she had never wanted to share with anyone. "My mother became very sick," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. There was no money for her medical care. My father left us. I was the oldest child. I had to quit my studies and find work to support my family. The room fell silent again as people absorbed this information. Here was a woman who had given up a brilliant career, who had sacrificed her dreams to take care of her family. Instead of becoming a world-famous pianist, she had spent 30 years cleaning hotel rooms and washing dishes to survive. A music teacher from the local conservatory wiped tears from her eyes. She thought about all the talented students she had taught over the years, and how few of them had even a fraction of Maria's natural ability. To think that someone with such extraordinary gifts had been forced to abandon music because of poverty and family responsibility was heartbreaking. "But your talent," Dr. Weber said, his voice full of emotion. "How could you just stop playing?" "Music like that does not just disappear," Maria smiled sadly. "I never stopped loving music. But loving something and being able to make a living from it are two different things. I had responsibilities. My mother needed medicine. My younger brothers and sisters needed food and clothes. Music is beautiful, but it does not pay for rent or groceries." A wealthy businessman in the crowd felt ashamed as he thought about all the money he spent on luxury items he did not really need. Here was someone who had given up everything for her family, while he complained about having to pay taxes on his third vacation home. The journalist who had been searching the internet found an old article about Maria's disappearance from the music world. "It says here that you were supposed to perform at the Salzburg Festival in 1995, but you never appeared. The organizers said they tried to contact you, but you had moved and left no forwarding address. I could not face explaining to everyone why I was quitting," Maria said. "It was easier to just disappear. People in the music world would not have understood. They would have said I was throwing away my gift, wasting my talent. They would have been right, but that did not make it any less necessary." Dr. Weber shook his head in amazement. "But you kept playing? Your technique tonight was flawless. You cannot maintain that level of skill without constant practice." Maria laughed softly, and for the first time since her identity had been revealed, she looked a little more relaxed. "I work at a hotel downtown, sometimes very late at night when all the guests are sleeping. I go to the ballroom where they keep an old piano. The night security guard lets me play for an hour or two. It is not much, but it is enough to keep my fingers moving." The image of Maria playing piano alone in an empty hotel ballroom in the middle of the night moved many people in the crowd to tears. They pictured her finishing her shift of cleaning rooms, then sitting down at an old piano to keep her dreams alive in secret, playing for an audience of empty chairs and sleeping guests. A young woman who had been taking piano lessons since childhood realized that she had been complaining about having to practice 30 minutes a day. Here was someone who had maintained world-class technique by practicing in secret for a few hours a week on an old hotel piano. It made her own excuses seem petty and foolish. Zimmerman finally found his voice and approached Maria with obvious shame on his face. "Madam, I owe you the deepest apology. What I did tonight was cruel and unforgivable. I had no idea. But that is no excuse. I am truly sorry." Maria looked at him with eyes that held no anger, only sadness. "You saw a woman in a simple dress with rough hands and you assumed she had nothing valuable to offer. You are not the first person to make that mistake, and you will not be the last. But perhaps tonight you learned something about the danger of judging people by their appearance." The crowd murmured in agreement. Everyone in the room was thinking about their own assumptions and prejudices, about the times they had dismissed people based on their clothes or their jobs or their social status. Maria's performance had not just been a display of musical talent. It had been a lesson about human dignity and the hidden depths that exist in every person. Dr. Weber was still shaking his head in wonder. 30 years, he said. 30 years of the world missing out on your music. What a tragedy." But Maria surprised him with her response. "Was it really a tragedy?" she asked. "My mother lived 8 more years because I was able to pay for her treatment. My brothers and sisters got an education and built good lives for themselves. I kept music alive in my heart, even if I could not share it with the world. Perhaps that is not such a terrible thing." As the truth about Maria's past continued to spread through the crowd, people began to see her performance in a new light. This was not just someone with natural talent who had learned to play piano well. This was one of the most gifted musicians of her generation, someone who had sacrificed everything for love and duty. and who had just shared her gift with them in one magical, unexpected moment. In the days that followed Maria's extraordinary performance at the Musikverein, word of what had happened spread far beyond the walls of the concert hall. Dr. Weber had written a passionate article for the Vienna Music Journal, describing the evening as one of the most moving musical experiences of my lifetime. The story was picked up by newspapers, radio stations, and social media across Europe and beyond. Heinrich Zimmermann found himself at the center of a story that was both humbling and transformative. The video of Maria's performance, recorded by several audience members, had been viewed millions of times online. But more importantly for Zimmermann, the incident had forced him to confront the person he had become over the years of fame and success. The morning after the reception, Zimmermann arrived at Maria's hotel with a large bouquet of flowers and a written apology. He found her in the laundry room, folding sheets and towels as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. She looked up when he entered, showing no surprise or anger, only a quiet dignity that made his shame even deeper. "I came to apologize properly," he said, offering her the flowers. "What I did was unforgivable. I let success make me cruel and arrogant. You showed me last night what real artistry looks like, and more importantly, what real character looks like." Maria accepted the flowers with a gentle smile. "Thank you. But you do not need to feel so terrible. We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them." Zimmermann shook his head. "You are too kind. I want to make this right. I have spoken with my manager, and we would like to arrange a proper concert for you. The Vienna Symphony has already expressed interest in having you perform as their featured soloist. You could have your career back, Maria. You could return to the world where you belong." But Maria's response surprised him. "That is very generous, but I am not sure that world is where I belong anymore. I am not the same person I was 30 years ago. My life has taught me different things about what is truly valuable." Over the following weeks, however, opportunities began to present themselves that Maria found harder to refuse. The Vienna Conservatory offered her a position teaching master classes to their most advanced students. A small recording studio wanted to make an album of her playing. Several music festivals invited her to perform, not as a returning prodigy, but as a mature artist with something unique to share. Most surprisingly, a documentary filmmaker approached her about telling her story. He was not interested in creating a sad tale about lost dreams, but rather a celebration of someone who had found different ways to keep music alive in her life. The film would explore themes of sacrifice, family, and the many forms that a successful life could take. Meanwhile, Zimmermann was experiencing his own transformation. The incident at the reception had gone viral, but not in the way he had feared. Instead of mocking him for his cruelty, most people praised him for his public apology and his efforts to make amends. More importantly, the experience had reminded him why he had become a musician in the first place. He began volunteering at a music school in a poor neighborhood of Vienna, teaching piano to children who could not afford private lessons. He established a scholarship fund for young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that talent would not be wasted due to poverty. He found that teaching these eager, grateful students brought him more joy than performing for wealthy audiences who took his skill for granted. "Maria, Santos showed me that music is not about impressing people or building a career," he told a journalist who was writing about his changed approach to his art. "Music is about connecting with other human beings, about sharing something beautiful that makes life more meaningful." I had forgotten that, but she reminded me. Maria eventually decided to accept some of the opportunities that were offered to her, but on her own terms. She agreed to teach master classes once a week at the conservatory, sharing her knowledge with a new generation of musicians. She recorded a small album of pieces that had special meaning for her, with all proceeds going to a charity that helped families with medical expenses. She also began performing occasionally at small venues around Vienna, retirement homes, community centers, and hospitals. These were not glamorous concerts that would advance her career, but intimate performances for people who rarely had access to live classical music. She found these concerts more rewarding than any performance she had given as a young prodigy. The hotel where Maria worked offered to promote her to a management position, but she chose to continue as a housekeeper, working fewer hours so she could pursue her musical activities. Her co-workers were proud of their famous colleague, and the hotel began advertising that their cleaning staff included a world-class pianist. One evening, 6 months after the reception at the Musikverein, Maria was playing at a retirement home when she noticed an elderly man in the front row listening with tears in his eyes. After her performance, he approached her with shaking hands. "I am Professor Muller," he said quietly. "I was your teacher at the conservatory 30 years ago." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she recognized her beloved teacher, now much older and frailer than when she had last seen him. He had been like a father to her during her student years, believing in her talent even when she had doubts about herself. "I have thought about you every day for 30 years, he said. "I blamed myself for not helping you find a way to continue your studies while supporting your family. I should have done more." "No," Maria said firmly. "You gave me everything I needed. You taught me that music is not just about technique or career success. You taught me that music is about expressing the deepest truths of the human heart. I have been doing that all my life, just in different ways than we expected." Professor Muller smiled through his tears. "You have become exactly the musician I always hoped you would be. Not just technically skilled, but wise and compassionate. Your music tonight touched these elderly people in ways that a concert hall performance never could. You have found the true purpose of art." As the months passed, Maria's story continued to inspire people around the world. Her choice to prioritize family over career, her years of keeping her talent alive in secret, and her graceful return to music on her own terms resonated with millions of people who had made similar sacrifices in their own lives. The documentary about her life, titled The Hidden Pianist, won several awards and was shown in theaters and on television worldwide. It sparked conversations about talent and opportunity, about the different ways to measure success, and about the hidden depths that exist in every person we meet. Zimmerman, meanwhile, had become one of Maria's strongest supporters. He attended her small concerts whenever possible, and often spoke publicly about how she had changed his understanding of what it meant to be an artist. Their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared love of music, became an example of how even the worst mistakes could lead to growth and redemption. The video of Maria's performance at the Musikverein continued to be shared millions of times, inspiring countless people to pursue their own abandoned dreams or to look more carefully at the people around them. Music schools reported increased enrollment, and piano sales rose as people were reminded of the power of classical music to touch the human soul. But perhaps the most important transformation was in Maria herself. After 30 years of believing that she had failed as a musician, she finally understood that she had succeeded in ways that were more meaningful than fame or wealth. She had kept music alive in her heart through the darkest times. She had raised a family and cared for her mother, while never completely abandoning her gift. And now, in the second half of her life, she was sharing that gift in ways that brought joy and inspiration to others. On quiet evenings, Maria still went to the hotel ballroom to play the old piano for an audience of empty chairs. But now she played not with sadness for what she had lost, but with gratitude for what she had kept. The music flowed from her fingers as pure and beautiful as ever, a reminder that true artistry comes not from perfect circumstances, but from a heart that refuses to give up on beauty, even in the face of life's greatest challenges. The cruel joke that was meant to humiliate her had instead revealed her strength, her talent, and her dignity to the world. In the end, Maria Santos had achieved something far greater than career success. She had shown that it is possible to live a life of genuine meaning, where love and sacrifice and the pursuit of beauty matter more than fame or recognition, and that perhaps was the most beautiful music of all.